Bellevue, Washington, July 10th, 2020. Just after sunrise. It was one of those mornings that made you forget the world was burning. The sky was a soft powder blue, and the warm golden light filtered through the dense rows of evergreens. Birds chirped lazily, and the first signs of morning life stirred at the overlook at Lake Mont Apartments. Children's toys sat scattered across the balconies. Porch lights flickered off one by one. The world yawned awake. Baron Lee stepped out of his apartment, coffee in hand, briefcase tucked under his arm. He was a picture of suburban peace, a 48-year-old sales manager, clean-cut, hard-working, and devoted to the small family that waited behind the door he just locked. He took a few easy strides toward his SUV, reached out for the handle, then time folded in half. The first shot cracked the air so violently it startled a nearby crow into the sky. Baron spun instinctively to his right, and that's when he saw him. A figure, masked and fast, sprinting straight toward him with a gun raised. The man didn't shout. He didn't hesitate.
Baron staggered backward, the first bullets tearing into his arm and chest. He stumbled, tried to swing the car door open for cover, but his body gave out and collapsed to the ground. He curled into himself instinctively, hands pressed to his wounds, blood pooling onto the concrete. The shooter stood over him and emptied the clip. And then, just as suddenly, he ran. No words, no robbery, no trace, only the brutal efficiency of someone with a mission. Inside the apartment, Baron's wife screamed. Neighbors jolted from their beds. One woman, her voice trembling, dialed 911. "I think I just heard 7 gunshots," she whispered, as if the shooter might still be listening. "Someone's screaming outside. Help!" Another neighbor bolted out barefoot, racing toward the bleeding man sprawled near the curb. From the moment the first shot rang out to the last drop of blood hitting the ground, it took barely 30 seconds. 30 seconds to turn a peaceful morning into a war zone. And as sirens screamed in the distance, no one, no neighbor, not first responder, not even Baron's own wife could have guessed. This wasn't random. This was no mugging gone wrong. This was a contract, a hit. And the person who ordered it, she wasn't a stranger. She was family. Baron Lee wasn't a man who invited chaos. He lived for structure, the sales meetings, the packed school lunches, the precise way he folded his socks. His life had once flirted with dysfunction, sure, but by 2020, things had stabilized. He lived in a modest apartment with his wife, Dee, and his 6-year-old son, Eric, a boy from a previous marriage. Eric had suffered both mentally and physically from a devastating misdiagnosis early in life, one that would alter his development forever. Baron had spent years fighting to get Eric the care he needed, and when the courts finally granted him full custody, he promised to never let the boy slip through the cracks again. Eric's life was a delicate balance of therapy appointments, medication schedules, and specialized education. Baron managed it all without complaint. He worked hard, stayed sober, paid his bills on time. He loved his son. He even loved his ex-wife, once. Her name was Sharon Kelly. To those who met her casually, Sharon seemed polite, maybe even charming. She wore makeup that softened the lines of bitterness etched into her face. She smiled easily, laughed loudly, but underneath there was a sharp edge, the kind that could cut deep when crossed. In 2017, Sharon lost custody of Eric after a court ruled her neglectful. The boy was placed in temporary foster care before being reunited with Baron and Dee in Washington. Sharon's visitation was restricted. Her contact was monitored. And just like that, she was locked out of her son's life. But that wasn't the part that broke her. What Sharon truly mourned wasn't the boy, it was the money. Years earlier, following Eric's misdiagnosis, Baron had sued the hospital responsible. They won a significant settlement, millions according to some records, which was placed in a tightly controlled trust fund under Eric's name. Barron was named the trustee. Sharon had no legal access, no authority, no claim. Unless, of course, something happened to Barron.
That's when the whispers started. Friends noticed her mood turning darker. She made offhand comments about how Barron didn't deserve to raise their son, how she was meant to be the one with him, how all that money's just sitting there. At first, it was all talk. But then Sharon disappeared from social media. She changed her number. Friends stopped hearing from her altogether. When she resurfaced, she was quiet, calculated. And somewhere along the way, she found a way to contact a 17-year-old boy she barely knew, a troubled kid from a town an hour north of Bellevue. His name was Joseph Good. He wasn't much older than Arik. But Sharon didn't want to parent Joseph. She wanted to pay him, to take care of something, to take care of someone. And back in Bellevue, Barron had no idea that a woman he hadn't spoken to in over a year had just set the wheels in motion for his murder. The morning of July 10, 2020, didn't begin with blood. It began with gasoline. At 6:30 a.m., surveillance footage from a traffic camera outside the overlook at Lakemont Apartments caught something odd. A red Ford F-150 circling the complex slowly. Too slowly. The kind of slow that makes security guards sit up straighter. The truck passed the main lot once, then twice. Then it pulled into a nearby parking area and just as quickly backed out and vanished. 3 minutes later, a teenager appeared on foot. Thin build, black shorts, light hoodie, a medical mask over his face. He moved with purpose, like he'd been here before. But investigators would later confirm he hadn't. He was using a GPS. The young man, later identified as Joseph Good, age 17, entered the complex through a breezeway. At the exact same time, the red Ford F-150 looped back into the lot and parked again. Then it sat, engine idling. Joseph disappeared into the apartment complex on foot. A few minutes later, Barron Lee would be bleeding out on the pavement. When 911 calls started flooding in, the red truck pulled away at high speed. It was subtle, efficient, mechanical.
The first officers on scene never even noticed the vehicle. Their attention was on the man in the parking lot. The blood, the gunshot wounds, the cries for help. Barron was still conscious, though barely. His wife held his hand as paramedics arrived. "My arms are shot, my leg, my chest," he kept repeating. "Please hurry, please." The shooter hadn't taken anything. Not Barron's wallet, not his phone, not his keys. He hadn't spoken a word. He didn't care about property. He cared about the mission. Detectives canvassed the area, but no one had witnessed the shooting itself. What they did have, however, was surveillance. And surveillance told a clear story. The red F-150 was tracked to Mount Vernon, a town roughly an hour north of Bellevue. The license plate came back to the Mendes household, home to another 17-year-old, Quincy Mendes, Joseph's best friend. The pattern emerged fast. Joseph was the gunman. Quincy was the driver. The truck belonged to Quincy's family. The two had driven to Bellevue under the cover of dawn, waited, executed the plan, and left. But why would two teenagers drive 60 miles to try and murder a man they didn't know? That was the question detectives needed answers to, because nothing about this made sense. Joseph had no criminal record. Quincy was a quiet kid with a love for old trucks and loud music. Neither of them had any connection to Barron Lee, at least not directly. But someone had given Joseph an address. Someone had given him a reason. And someone, somewhere, had promised him money. 3 months passed before detectives made their move. Joseph Good and Quincy Mendes were arrested on October 8, 2020. No warning, no chase. Just two boys in handcuffs staring at the concrete floor of the Bellevue Police Department, waiting for someone to tell them what came next. Joseph went first. He was silent for most of the interview, slouched in the metal chair, eyes darting between the clock and the detective. When told he was under arrest for attempted first-degree murder, he blinked hard, like he hadn't heard correctly. "Wait, what?" He asked for a lawyer almost immediately. The detective nodded. "That's your right." Joseph was led to a holding cell, but the panic in his voice had already confirmed one thing. He didn't think this would catch up to him. Quincy, on the other hand, was more talkative, nervous, twitchy, and trying way too hard to sound casual. His voice cracked, he over-explained, he contradicted himself 5 times in the first 10 minutes. I was just high, man, on shrooms. He told me we were just going for a drive."
Detectives let him talk. Every now and then, they'd drop a breadcrumb, a surveillance photo, a Snapchat screenshot, a timestamp from GPS data, and Quincy's story would shift just a little more. He admitted he drove the red truck that morning. He claimed he didn't know what Joseph planned to do, but also admitted Joseph told him, "I'm going to dump a whole clip." That wasn't a figure of speech, that was a confession hiding in plain sight. Quincy described waiting in the truck while Joseph disappeared into the complex. He said his engine was ticking, that he had his emergency lights on. He even described the shoes he was wearing as if trying to seem too boring, too ordinary to be part of anything sinister. But detectives weren't interested in his shoes. They were interested in his phone. Because after the shooting, Quincy had taken a screenshot at exactly 12:05 p.m. of a local news article about the Bellevue apartment shooting. Then he deleted it. Or thought he did. "How do you think we found it?" the detective asked. "Apple keeps everything in the cloud."
The evidence came from Quincy's own iCloud account. Another screenshot was found from the next morning, another article about Barron's condition. The implication was clear. Quincy knew. He knew exactly what happened. He knew who was shot, and he knew who pulled the trigger. He said we'd get paid, 4 to 6 grand. That's what he told me. Detectives leaned in. Who's paying him? Quincy hesitated, shifted, looked down. I don't know. Some lady. He didn't say her name. And just like that, a new shadow entered the room. A third person, unseen, unnamed, funding the whole operation from behind a curtain. The interviews concluded with Quincy saying one thing, over and over again like a broken clock. I didn't know he was really gonna do it. But the police weren't buying it. They had GPS data, phone records, video, motive. They had 2 kids wrapped up in a murder plot far bigger than either of them understood, and soon they'd uncover the woman who started it all.
She didn't pull the trigger, she never set foot on the property, but without her, none of it would have happened. Her name was Sharon Kelly, Baron Lee's ex-wife, Eric's biological mother, and, as detectives now confirmed, the architect of the hit. They found her through a device, not a phone or computer, a GPS tracker, the kind you buy online for less than $100. This one had been affixed with industrial adhesive underneath Baron's SUV. It was subtle, hidden, but after Baron's car was towed from the scene and combed by forensics, a technician found the brick-sized tracker under the rear wheel well. The serial number was intact. Detectives traced it to a third-party seller, then to an Amazon account, and then to a buyer's name, Sharon Kelly. The GPS tracker was linked to the same navigation app Joseph used to find Baron's exact location. There was no coincidence, no guesswork. Joseph had followed Baron to his death spot by design. With this discovery, police knew they had their queen. They executed a search warrant and brought Sharon into custody. But from the moment she sat down in the interrogation room, she lawyered up. No denials, no emotions, just one icy sentence.
"I'd like an attorney." Detectives didn't need her confession. The evidence was a wall of nails, and her silence only made it more damning. Twist number 5. When investigators pulled her online history, they found more than just GPS purchases. Sharon had searched how to hire someone to scare a person, untraceable hitmen, how to track someone without them knowing. She wasn't being careful. She was being desperate. But the most telling clue wasn't digital. It was financial. Detectives uncovered a $13,000 withdrawal from Sharon's bank account made just a week before the shooting. Cash. No explanation. No receipts. The same amount Joseph had allegedly been offered.
Sharon had no stable job, no income, and lived off temporary disability benefits. The only money she had access to? A small inheritance and a lingering obsession with her son's trust fund. When detectives reconstructed her motive, it became clear. Sharon didn't want to reunite with her son. She wanted to control his money. If Barron died, she assumed custody might revert to her, and with custody came access. She didn't think Barron would survive. She didn't think she'd get caught. She underestimated everyone, especially her own son's resilience. Meanwhile, Barron was still in the hospital, enduring months of physical therapy, unable to walk without assistance, his arms pinned with metal rods. He hadn't yet been told who was responsible. When he finally heard Sharon's name, he didn't speak. He didn't yell. He simply nodded. He already knew. Somewhere deep down, he'd always suspected she'd come for him. He just didn't know she'd do it through 2 high school boys and a handgun.
The more Quincy talked, the darker things got. At first, it was small stuff. Admissions of smoking weed, experimenting with mushrooms, skipping school, drifting from his parents. But then he started naming names, whispering phrases like big homies and up the chain. To the untrained ear, it sounded like teenage posturing, but to the detectives, it sounded like gang grooming. Quincy claimed Joseph had been hanging around older guys, people with real records, real guns, and real money. He said Joseph talked about getting noticed and earning stripes. And then came the twist that no one saw coming. Joseph wasn't acting alone. He was auditioning. This wasn't just a one-off job. This was Joseph's shot at proving himself to someone, somewhere, much higher up. And Sharon, she may have just been the middleman.
But if Joseph was being used, Quincy had been thrown into the deep end with bricks in his pockets. He'd become the getaway driver, the lookout, the silent accomplice. He said Joseph promised him $5,000, enough to help his parents with rent, enough to buy a used car. He claimed he was just along for the ride, but the ride was murder. When detectives asked Quincy why he didn't back out, why he didn't leave when he suspected what Joseph was about to do, his answer was haunting. I didn't think he'd really do it. I thought he was bluffing. I thought he was still the same kid. But Joseph wasn't the same kid, and neither was Quincy. Surveillance data showed that after the shooting, Quincy drove through the apartment complex twice, not because he was lost, not because he was looking for Joseph, but because Joseph had Snapchatted him exact pickup points. He was giving Quincy real-time updates while blood still ran through Baron Lee's shirt. When confronted with this, Quincy deflated. His last line of defense, ignorance, collapsed. He admitted to knowing Joseph was armed. He admitted to knowing someone had hired him. He even admitted that Joseph said, "Once we get the money, we're going shopping, drip season." New clothes, fast food, a celebration. Of a man nearly dying. And yet, neither of them got paid. Joseph never saw a dime. Quincy got nothing but an arrest record. Sharon never delivered the money because the plan fell apart too fast. Too many witnesses. Too much heat. She ghosted them, her tools, her puppets, just as quickly as she'd recruited them. And for the first time, Quincy said what no one had expected. She used us. We were just kids.
She used us to do her dirty work. The boys were facing adult charges, but the woman who gave them the reason, she was about to face something much worse.
By the time Quincy Mendez sat down for his final round of questioning, his voice had changed. It wasn't cracking anymore. It wasn't defensive either. It was dull, like something inside him had snapped and couldn't be put back together. His eyes were rimmed red from tears that dried hours ago. He wasn't trying to be clever anymore. He wasn't trying to look tough. He was just trying to survive. And so, finally, he told the whole truth. He said we'd get money. He said he was going to unclip the whole mag on someone. I didn't think he meant it. The detective sat quietly as he spoke. They didn't interrupt when he admitted to everything. That he drove to Bellevue knowingly, that Joseph told him someone was gonna get dropped, and that there was a payout promised by someone Joseph referred to only as her.
Tell a story, narrate a case. Quincy didn't know Sharon Kelly personally, never met her. Didn't even know her name until police showed him photos of Barron and asked if he recognized the woman in them. He didn't. But he knew the money came from somewhere, and Joseph was always vague about who was behind it. He said, once we get to 13, it's all good. 13, as in $13,000. Quincy's role in the hit was even bigger than he'd admitted. He wasn't just a ride. He was the logistics guy. The GPS Sharon bought? Joseph used it, but Quincy drove the truck to match the tracker's pings. He was actively steering toward a man's death, and he knew it. So when detectives asked what finally made him break, Quincy didn't pause. Barron lived. He survived, and I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking, what if his kid had been out there with him? What Quincy didn't know, but would later learn, was that Barron's son, Eric, was the ultimate reason behind the entire crime.
The trust fund Eric held from the malpractice lawsuit? Worth millions. Sharon Kelly's plan wasn't just to eliminate Barron, it was to regain control of Eric. And if Barron died, Sharon would likely regain custody by default. Barron believed Sharon's next target might have been Eric himself, the boy with the trust fund, and the only real obstacle left between her and the money. But in the sterile glow of the interrogation room, all Quincy could focus on was his own fall. I messed up. I was high, I was broke, and I thought I could help my family, you know? The detective nodded slowly. You weren't thinking straight, but that doesn't make what happened go away. Quincy dropped his head into his hands. I never wanted to hurt anyone, I swear to God. But someone had been hurt. 9 bullets had shredded a man's body. Months of surgery, rods in his arms, a shattered hip, and a child, mentally disabled, dependent on his father, nearly orphaned. And Sharon Kelly? She was in a separate holding cell, refusing to speak. No apologies, no explanations, just silence. When detectives asked her lawyer if she had a statement, he shook his head. She wasn't talking. But she didn't need to. The evidence spoke loud enough. August 2023. King County Superior Court. Barron Lee walked into the courtroom with a cane in one hand and a scar twisting beneath his shirt collar. It had taken 15 months of grueling rehab to walk again. 9 bullets, 2 shattered arms, a broken hip. But he showed up. Not for justice, for closure. In the front row sat Joseph Good, now 20. Next to him, Quincy Mendez, the same age. Their suits were too big, their eyes sunken, their futures reduced to court dates and inmate numbers. They both rose to speak. Quincy first. There's not a day I don't regret what I did. I was stupid. I didn't think for myself. I wish I could take it back. Then, Joseph, stammering. I didn't know how far it would go. I was promised things. But I did it. I can't change that. And then Barron stood. The courtroom hushed. He looked at the 2 young men, held their gaze. You made a bad decision, a very bad one, but I don't want that to define your whole life. I forgave you long before this day." Even the judge looked surprised. But forgiveness has its boundaries, because 3 months later, in November, Sharon Kelly stood trial. Barron attended that sentencing too, but his words were colder. "I said it 3 years ago," he told the court, his voice like steel. "I hope she rots in prison." Sharon was convicted of solicitation to commit second-degree murder. She never apologized. She maintained the attack wasn't about money, though the bank withdrawals, the GPS tracker, and the silence all said otherwise. She was sentenced to 13 years and 9 months. Joseph received 12 years and 8 months for attempted murder and unlawful possession of a firearm. Quincy was given 8 years and 10 months for first-degree assault. And as for Barron, he left the courtroom, limping but standing tall. He took Eric's hand, the boy still too young to understand what nearly happened to his father and what might have happened to him. The system had spoken, but justice, in stories like this, never feels clean. It leaves residue, bitterness, questions that won't go away. Like how a mother could use 2 boys as bullets, or how close she came to finishing the job, or how, in the end, forgiveness was never meant for everyone. If this story gripped you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Every week, we bring you the real stories behind the badge, the darkest crimes, the toughest decisions, and the hidden motives no body cam ever catches. What would you have done in Barron's place? Could you have forgiven them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Subscribe now to never miss an episode. Because in Bodycam Chronicles, justice is never just black and white.